Okay, guys, so hopefully this all works well now. Which is, it's actually really kind of strange that that fixed it because I actually had just started up the computer about an hour ago. So I don't know what I did on it during that hour, but anyway, we'll see. Could be a Teams issue, actually, because it was giving me a Teams error message. Yeah. All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to continue our discussion of database analysis, and we'll finish off that discussion today. There will be a small example towards the end of the set of slides where we can kind of look at some how we can use different information that we gain from the existing system, the existing situation, to be able to determine what type of objects, what type of structures we'll need for maintaining our database. All right, so let's get right into it. But first, as always, we have a quote from a guy named Mendelssohn. And he says, "Yeah, analysis of concepts is for the understanding, nothing more than what the magnifying glass is for sight." And I think what we're trying to get at here with this is what we do when we analyze something is we can see a big picture. So if I were to look at something, you know, I can see parts of it. I can see how things work. I can see aspects of it. But when I take a magnifying glass or a microscope, right, or something like that, I can see so much more, right? I mean, you think about that in media, oftentimes we see Sherlock Holmes represented with a magnifying glass doing things, like walking around looking at stuff, right? Why does he need a magnifying glass? Was there something wrong with his eyes? Well, of course not. His eyes are fine. He can see fine, but the magnifying glass helps him to be able to see things that he couldn't see with just the normal sight. And so as we analyze different things to understand them better, we need to make sure that we are not just looking at the surface, but we're getting down into it, down into understanding how it works and how we can help it work better. Okay. All right. So we left off. Let's see. What first? Can you guys remind me what types of fact-finding techniques did we already talk about yesterday? What do you remember from yesterday? All right, so we observe the organization in action. Yep. All right, interview. Right, we interview people. Was there any others? Did we talk about any others yesterday? Let's see. I want to make sure I'm not. Yeah, we should have talked about a third one. What was the third one? Oh, yeah. Anybody? It was actually the very first one we talked about. That's probably why I had a hard time remembering it too myself. Oh, no one remembers? All right. Let's see. This one, right? Examining documentation, right? Like emails and user manuals and stuff like that to be able to understand the mission statement of the organization would be something that would be a part of this. Right? So those are our three that we've already covered. And now we're going to have two more that we'll talk about. One being research. Now, be careful with this word research, right? Because the word research, I think your microphone's on. Let's see. Hear that? All right. So the word research, oftentimes we think it means just looking up information, right? In fact, a lot of people that I've run across over the past few years in my life is they've talked about things like, they use the phrase like, do your own research about things. And oftentimes what they mean is, watch this YouTube video that I found, right? It can be that, right? But be careful with assuming that research just means going around and looking up any information that happens to be related to the topic we're trying to understand, right? What we want to do with research is we want to have systematic searching of reference materials that are related to what we are trying to understand, right? And not just any information, but we want to get it from good sources, right? So if you were to go on YouTube and say, search for whatever it is that you're trying to find, right? You might find a lot of videos related to your topic. You might find a lot of not so good information related to your topic, right? And so, yeah, and so make sure that you are looking at authoritative sources and sources that are have good information, trusted sources. Okay, so for example, a lot of students will use Wikipedia for the purposes of writing like research papers and things like that. I'm not saying Wikipedia is a bad source. Let me encourage you, if you go to Wikipedia to search for some information regarding a topic, that you also look at the sources down at the bottom. Right, the Wikipedia, one of the nice things about it is that it does, for its information, provide a list of references down at the bottom for where the information was obtained from. And go look at those sources to find out more about what they say about the topic. All right, don't just use Wikipedia itself. All right, okay. Some benefits to the research method. By the way, let me also say this. Most of you, for your group project, I would say this would be probably the largest fact-finding technique you will use for your group project, because some of these other ones will be difficult for you to do. So let's say you're doing a hotel management system. Some of you are doing the hotel management system. Unless you have someone that you know personally who works for a hotel, or has had an internship with a hotel or something like that, it might be difficult for you to do a good amount of interviewing, right? Or observing the organization in action. It might be difficult depending on the topic that you chose. All right, so most of you are probably going to do mostly research-based fact-finding technique. Okay, so what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of the research method? If a solution already exists, we might be able to just find it, right? So if we have an idea of how tables are already organized, we might be able to find an example database, maybe not the exact solution that we're looking for, but it could be close. It could be similar to what we're trying to solve, what we're trying to create, and we could modify it to fit our needs. All right, so we don't have to, there's an English idiom, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So in English, the idea is the wheel has existed, the wheel has existed for millions of years, right? This concept of using a round thing to move stuff from one place to another has existed for generations. And why would we need to invent the wheel if it already exists? Right, and so that's that. I don't know if there's a Turkish equivalent to that phrase about this idea that something already exists. I don't need to do the work to create it myself. All right, so that could be a benefit of using the research-based solution. Okay. We can also see, if we don't have an exact solution that's the same as what we're trying to create, we might be able to find a place where somebody has already done something similar, right? And we could see how they went about solving the problem, and maybe we could use a similar approach to solving our problem, right? At the very least, it can keep us up to date with current developments. You'll hear the phrase state of the art a lot. State of the art means the latest technology or the latest way of doing something, or the latest methodology that exists for how to do certain things, right? One of the things that we want to try to do as researchers ourselves, as people in any industry, honestly, is we want to keep up to date with what the current trend is, right? So, for example, if we're talking about data storage, about not transportable, removable data storage, thumb drives, right? I wish I don't have one here with me for some reason. I normally do. We have removable thumb drives, right? Well, if I'm still thinking like when I was your age, when I was a student, that a removable thumb drive could hold something like 256 megabytes, that's not keeping up to date with the latest technology, is it? Right? I need to keep up to date with what the latest is, right? I don't even know what the largest thumb drive is nowadays, but I know that it's multiple gigabytes that we can carry around with us. Oh, speaking of that, I don't know how many of you heard, but Moore, well, not David Moore, the guy that created Moore's Law, he actually passed away. I can't remember. Why am I blanking on his first name? He passed away this recent week. Gordon Moore. Yeah, he created. Well, he hypothesized that the number of transistors on a chip would double every 18 months, and pretty much has kept up with that. So his entire life, we know there's probably a limit to how much that can go on for, but basically that's Moore's Law is the reason why memory storage and processing power is way more advanced now than it was 20 years ago. So, but he did pass away this week. I meant to use a quote from him in the class this week. I forgot. So some disadvantages: access to appropriate sources of information. Again, we don't just go out and search anywhere. Right? We don't use necessarily any YouTube video that happens to say, we especially are not going to use a YouTube video that says, click here for the 10 best ways to develop a database or something like that, right? Anything that looks like clickbait, we're not going to use, right? But we may not have access to the best sources depending on our field, right? So for example, some journals paywall, meaning you'd have to pay to be able to read their articles, which is sad, that some information, but also at the same time, the journals need to be able to pay their employees and be able to make money, right? To be able to make a profit. So that does end up limiting some people in their ability to gain access to good information, right? Right. We may end up spending a lot of time trying to research the problem, but there's not a lot of work that's been done on the problem we're trying to understand, and so there may not be a ton of documentation available, right? And that's not necessarily, I shouldn't say that there's not a lot of work that's been done. One of the deficiencies in a lot of fields is good documentation about how problems are solved and about how things are done. You guys may remember that I've said multiple times in 101 and 102 that your code will be read a lot more than it's written, and so it can be very important to write code that is understandable, but also if you have a set of code that's difficult to understand, to document it using comments. One of the hardest things to get programmers to do is the non-programming parts of our job, which is to document using comments, to document by creating user manuals and things like that. It can be difficult getting programmers to want to do those things because it's like, that's not the solving the problem. That's just documenting how the problem was solved or how to do something, right? And so because it can be difficult to get programmers to write these things, it can result in a lack of good documentation, lack of good information available. So we tend to kind of say, let me solve the problem now, I'll document it later. But then when later comes, we kind of just forget about the whole documenting part. It happens. But it can make it difficult for future people who want to try to help solve the same problem. All right. All right, so questionnaires are similar to interviews, right? In that we ask questions, the respondents can choose to respond in a way that is where they can choose to respond to the questionnaire in a time manner that's convenient for them. Right? Let's see, it's like I said, it's similar to interviews, but it's in paper or digital format. Okay. Some advantages: we can get the questionnaires at their convenience of whenever is a convenient time for them. It's relatively inexpensive, right? So we can make one questionnaire and send it out. It doesn't require an interviewer to sit with them, right? Responses can be analyzed quickly. We can basically, when they submit, whether it be you can do a digital format through a Google form or a Microsoft form, and they can get that information quickly, and we can very quickly see, okay, how many people answered this way, how many people answered this way, and then, you know, some of these will even give us nice, pretty graphs and things like that. Some disadvantages: respondents could be low because some people may say, oh, I'll get around to it when I get around to it, and just kind of forget. Questionnaires might be returned incomplete, right? In that they might not fill out everything because they might, again, only if it takes a while for me to understand what the question is being asked, or it takes a while for me to think about how I want to respond, I may just not respond to that question. If the question is worded in such a way that a respondent doesn't really understand what's being asked, then we don't really have an opportunity to change the wording, right? And as we talked about with interviewing, body language is not a part of questionnaires, right? We don't get to see how the person responded. We only get to read what text they wrote, or what choice, if it's like a multiple choice type question, what choice they selected. Okay, you know, we can try to make things where it's like we can make some fields required, so people may have to be forced to write something in the blank. In fact, this questionnaire is a way that we obtain information from you about how this course, for example, or any course that you take here. Right, so at the end of the semester, for every course, you have to fill out this questionnaire that kind of talks about different aspects of the course, right? Where you give a value, is it what, 1 to 5, right? Something, or 0 to 5, something like that. But there's also places where you can write comments, right? And I don't know, I can't think of off the top of my head what those questions are, but there's things where you type in a comment, you don't just give a numerical value. I know that those comment fields are required fields, right? Do you know how I know that those are required fields? Well, one, because none of them come back blank, but some of them come back with things like, and I'll type it in here into the box. Some of them come back with things like this or this, right? And that's your comment, right? That is not very helpful. right? That doesn't really help me understand things that were helpful to you or not helpful to you in the course. Okay. Some of you take the time to maybe something like this, none or no comment, right? Okay, again, not very helpful for me, right? Some of you maybe write this or this, right? Some of you write things like that, right? Thank you, or I'm sorry, depending on which one of those you wrote. But again, this doesn't really help me. All right, I'm glad if you think I'm the best teacher in the university. I'm sad if you think I'm not so great, right? But what that comment needs to be is it needs to be something that helped you learn in this course. So I can know that it helped some students and it may be something I want to incorporate more in the future. Or something that didn't help you learn in this course. So what was it that I did or I had as part of this course that didn't help you learn the material that you wanted to learn? That's what I need these comments to be so that I can become a better teacher. This doesn't help. These comments, none of these comments that I've given here help me become a better teacher, right? I need you to help me to become a better teacher by giving me constructive criticism, good and bad, right? I need to know what helped you, what didn't help you, so that I can know what kinds of things I should incorporate in the future, what kinds of things I should avoid or remove from my teaching style. Okay, all right, so I hope that you give me constructive criticism this semester. All right. Okay, so let's look at a simple example. So this is some example where we are going to use documentation. Again, because these are slides based, we're going to have to use documentation as our example here, because obviously we can't use interviews with our users, right? We can't give questionnaires to our employees, right? Research, we could do some research. We could do research based on looking up other property management systems that exist, right? We could do that. And then what was the last one? Let's see, we got research, we got documentation, which is what we're going to do. We've got interviews and questionnaires. I said there was a fifth one. What, you guys remember which one it is? It was the first one you remembered. First one that one of you remembered in this chat. So if you scroll back up through the chat, you'll see it. Anyone? Are you guys still online? So anyone gonna attempt to answer? Are you just no, not that. No. What's the other technique that we're looking at? So I said research, documentation, which is what we're going to look at here, interviews and questionnaires, and there was one more. There you go. Thank you. Is it Zehra, Celine? Which one is better for you? Let's see. So yeah, observation. So we can't really do observation, can't do interviews, right? Can't do questionnaires. We might could do research, you know, if we had more time, but for the slides here, we're just going to base it off of the documentation that exists, okay? All right, so what we can see from some of these information, like this registration form. So this is a staff registration form, okay? Let's see, let me get my little trusty pen out so that I can draw on this. Okay, so a staff registration form. So this is going to be staff information. Okay. So we'll say, okay, you know what? So we'll probably need something like a staff table. Think of it like a class, right? And attributes in that class will be things like staff number. What is their name? What is their gender? What is their date of birth? What position do they have? What salary are we going to pay them? What branch do they work at? Now, we'll get to this. Initially, we might think, okay, well, and the branch address is something that we can include in the staff table initially. What we'll see when we start getting into what's called normalization is why it would be best for this branch address to not be in the staff table, but to be in its own separate table. Right? We'll talk about that later, but for now, this is information that we say, okay, all of this is associated with the staff person, this branch address, where to find them when they're working. Right? Telephone number, how can I reach them? So this is all information that might go into a staff table. Okay. Some other details where applicable, who's their supervisor, manager, if they are a manager, which they are, what is their start date and what is their bonus. So this is all information that we might include in their staff table. Okay. Here we might see, okay, you know what? Staff listing for a branch. So a branch is going to have staff people. Now, when we start getting into what's called ER modeling, which I think is, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know where I put my list. Okay, there it is. ER modeling is next week, right? Yep, that's right. As I thought. Okay, so when we start getting into ER modeling, which is very similar to UML, right, it's kind of a basic part of UML, what we'll see is that our entities, UML calls them classes, we call them entities here, right? You might have a staff entity and a branch entity, and this is telling us that it has a relationship, right? That a branch, a staff belongs to a branch, so it's one on this side, and a branch has many staff people, right? Hopefully this notation isn't new to you, right? Hopefully you remember this notation from our discussions on UML back in 101, 102, well, 102 actually, 102. Okay. But again, we'll have a branch entity, a branch class that has a telephone number, that has, or numbers, that has an address, right? And has a list of staff people. Okay. All right. So here's some other examples here. Okay. Let's see. We got a few more slides to this. Let's. I need to take a break just for a moment. And so let's do this. Let's take our break a little bit early because we'll also get out a little bit early. So let's take our break now for 10 minutes and we will come back at 11:20. Okay. All right. So let me do a break now and then